So we are going to be investigating the whereabouts of the Beis HaMikdash, as Rabbi Smith already introduced. And we intend to go in the footsteps of the raiders of the Lost Ark. A little spoiler alert though, there were no raiders of the Lost Ark, but still we'll try to go in their footsteps and locate the Aron Kodesh. Another interesting point, which we will also come to better understand, is that in the second Beis HaMikdash, there actually was no Aron Kodesh on the Even HaShasiyah, which is the place of the Aron Kodesh in the Kodesh HaKadoshim, on the stone foundation, which Chazal tell us is the foundation of the world. In other words, the world was, so to say, developed from the place of that stone during the Sheshis Yemei Bereshis. And that is the stone that is believed to be at the center, at the bottom of the Dome of the Rock on Har Bayis, on Temple Mount. However, in the second Beis HaMikdash, the Aron Kodesh was not there because, as we will soon see, it was hidden prior to the building of the second Beis HaMikdash. And as a matter of fact, in the Avodah of Yom Kippur, when the Kohen Gadol would go into the Kodesh HaKadoshim, the high priest would enter the innermost chamber of the Beis HaMikdash, the Holy Temple, which was done only on Yom Kippur, once a year by one person in this one unique innermost chamber. So there were two primary forms of service of the Avodah of Yom Kippur, which were performed in the Kodesh HaKadoshim, in that innermost chamber. And one of them included sprinkling blood of certain karbonis, a special Yom Kippur sacrifice, which the blood had to be sprinkled in several places, and one of them, certainly the most unique, was between the badim, between the poles of the Aron Kodesh. In other words, the Aron Kodesh, the Aron which was kept in the Kodesh HaKadoshim, had two long golden poles that theoretically were used to carry it. I say theoretically because it was only used when it was carried, and during the time of Beis HaMikdash, that for the most part never happened. It was carried beforehand, in times of the Mishkan, and yes, that's the same Aron which was built in the time of Moshe Rabbeinu for the Mishkan. So that Aron had these two poles that were used to carry it, and the blood was sprinkled between the two poles. Now, in the time of the second Beis HaMikdash, when the Aron wasn't there on top of the rock, which was in the center of the Kodesh HaKadoshim, apparently jutting out of the floor. So the Kohen Gadol would sprinkle would do that sprinkling in the place of where those two poles would be on the rock, since the Aron wasn't there. But an obvious question should arise. We know the Beis HaMikdash constitutes several, or is comprised of several zones, several rooms, chambers, like I said, more accurately, zones, and it must contain certain kelim, certain vessels that were crucial to the Beis Hamikdash. So we all know that there was in the Beis Hamikdash the Aron, the Holy Ark, there was the menorah, the inner altar, the Mizbeach HaPnimi, and the Shulchan, the table for the showbread. There was also, of course, the outer Mizbeach, the main Mizbeach, where all the karbanos were generally brought, all the animal sacrifices and the flour offerings, etc. Almost virtually all the karbanos were brought on this Mizbeach. And the kior, the wash basin. A Beis Hamikdash that doesn't contain all of these elements is not a Beis Hamikdash made according to the Torah's instruction, and wouldn't be. It wouldn't serve the purpose. It wouldn't be kosher. So how is it that the second Beis Hamikdash didn't have the Aron to begin with? How can it be deemed a Beis Hamikdash when it's missing such a crucial and, I think it's fair to say, most sacred part of the Beis Hamikdash, the Aron itself? So we'll get to that issue a little later on. We'll start with a citation from the Rambam, from the halachas of the Beis Hamikdash, so the building and the composition, the arrangement of the Beis Hamikdash, how and where things were built and located. And as such, the Rambam also describes, like we said, the different zones of the Beis Hamikdash. So in the beginning of Perek Daled, the Rambam begins the 4th chapter as follows. After he already described what was in the Kodesh HaKadoshim, notice that the Aron was there on top of, the Aron was there. So the Rambam says as follows: Even hoisa b'Kodesh HaKadoshim b'Ma'arave, in the western part of the Beis Hamikdash, there was the Kodesh HaKadoshim, and inside that room, the innermost chamber, was a stone she'alav haya ha'aron munach, that the Aron was placed on this stone. So after the Rambam explains where it was, the Rambam says as follows: So the Eishabana Shlemi Esabayis, the Yada Sheseife Lichore, at the time when Shlomo HaMelech built the Beis Hamikdash, and by divine inspiration was aware that it would be destroyed, he built a place in which it would be possible to hide or to store the Aron, the Holy Ark. Where was this place? Lamata, below, b'matmonios, in hidden places, amukes, very deep in the ground, vakalkales, and sophisticated, in a labyrinth of sophisticated tunnels. So there was this labyrinth of sophisticated and complicated winding tunnels that Shlomo HaMelech built underground, and there, in this maze of tunnels, there were also rooms, which perhaps had secret entrances, whether it was doors behind covered walls that would otherwise not be noticed, or whatever it was. There were certain rooms or certain areas which were hidden even within this whole hidden maze. And this was all below, That was in the mountain below the Beis Hamikdash. And the Rambam continues, V'yeshio HaMelech Tziva v'gonzei b'mokim shebona shlomo. At the time of Yeshio HaMelech, who was 4 generations before the destruction of the first Beis Hamikdash, he hid the Aron in this place which Shlomo HaMelech had built. As it says in the Pasuk, the Rambam brings, Shnemer v'yemer la'leviim ha'mevinim v'lechol Yisrael ha'kedeshim la'Hashem tnuas alein ha'kedesh b'bayis asher bona Shlomo ben David melech Yisrael eilechem masa b'kotev ata idus Hashem alikeichem v'gemer. The Pasuk which says that Yeshua HaMelech commanded the Aron to be built, to be stored, to be hidden away in the place that Shlomo HaMelech built back in the day. Nigdas imei mata arim b'chul. Together with the Aron, the staff of Aaron HaKohen was also hidden away, etc., as well as other artifacts. And all these do not return to the Beis Hamikdash. In other words, they were not present in the second Beis Hamikdash in the room of the Kodesh HaKadoshim. As a matter of fact, the Rambam says even the Urim Tumim, the breastplate of the Kohen Gadol, which had 12 precious stones and wood by divine, which would communicate divine messages by lighting up, by letters engraved on those 12 stones, illuminating in response to questions posed to on high. This breastplate would transmit, communicate the divine messages. However, in the second Beis Hamikdash, the Rambam says, these this messaging system would not give responses. So yes, of course, the Kohen Gadol wore the breastplate, but there were no responses. In other words, this was also absent, or at least not functioning in the second Beis Hamikdash. So just FYI, together with the Aron, the Rambam, as we said, says there were other items that were stored away, that were hidden away by Yeshua HaMelech. And those include the Tzintzenes Hamon, the jar of mon from the time of the desert. Imagine. Hashem instructed Moshe Rabbeinu to take a sample of the mon, to take a jar of mon that the Yidden would eat in the desert, and to store this in the Kodesh HaKadoshim near the Aron. So this will be a remembrance. It will be a memoir. It will be a memento for the Jewish people throughout the generations, that they should see, we should be able to see with their own eyes, whenever it could or would be presented, the sustenance, the food that was actually the miraculous food that was given to the Jewish people in the desert. So you had the staff of Aaron, you had the mon, and there was also a special. All right, let's not get too off subject, but just to note, of course, together with the Aron Kodesh, when it was stored away by Yeshua, let's remember that inside the Aron, we had both pairs of the luchos, the complete luchos, the second set, as well as the first set of the shattered luchos. So the actual Aseret HaDibros engraved in stone, given by Hashem himself to Moshe Rabbeinu on Har Sinai, both sets of luchos were also in the Aron, and that was also hidden away. And then we have the original hard copy, the first Sefer Torah ever. The first Sefer Torah that HaKadosh Baruch Hu dictated to Moshe Rabbeinu, word for word, of course, and Moshe Rabbeinu transcribed in his own handwriting. The original hard copy, black on white, from which all other Sefer Torah were subsequently copied. In other words, Moshe Rabbeinu himself wrote many Sefer Torah afterwards, one for each Shevet. The Torah was translated into all languages. So all the Sefer Torah which Moshe Rabbeinu wrote subsequently were also copied from this Sefer Torah, from which all other future Sefer Torah until our day have been copied one from another from these Sefer Torah. So that original Sefer Torah, the original scroll which Moshe Rabbeinu wrote down, the first copy of the Torah, was also stored away in this secret cave, this secret hiding place below the mountain. So there are a few things here that deserve explanation. Firstly, we know that Rambam is not a history book. Rambam has other works that he wrote that are more philosophical, others that are more technical. But the Sefer of the Rambam, Mishnah Torah, in which he's describing the arrangement of the second Beis Hamikdash, is a Sefer of halachis halachos. It's only telling us the halachos, all the halachos, and only the halachos of the Torah. The Rambam doesn't even bring explanations for the halachos, doesn't bring reasons. It's just halachos, only halachos. In other words, the Rambam not bring reasons. The Rambam doesn't bring sources either. There are other works where he deals more with reasons or with sources. So much so is this a work of halacha only. The knowledge necessary to know the explanation, to know the details and the rules for every one of the Taryag mitzvahs. So why is it then that the Rambam is telling us this historical account of what happened when Yeshua foresaw that the Beis Hamikdash was going to be destroyed and how he instructed that the arm be hidden? What does that have to do with Allah? What is the law involved in that? Allah doesn't tell us things that happened in the past. He tells us laws, guidelines, rules, mitzvahs, halachas, particular dinim of the halachas, of the mitzvahs. When the Rambam does give a reason, or when the Rambam does provide a source, that even that must be understood as introducing another detail of an otherwise unknown halacha. So what's this all about? Why would the Rambam be telling us this? And especially, why would the Rambam be emphasizing that these tunnels were built in a complicated, sophisticated way, the whole maze, winding tunnels, winding below the mountain, deep below, and reaching the intended spot that was built by Shlomo HaMelech? And why, to begin with, does he have to let us know that it was built by Shlomo HaMelech? As we noted before, seems puzzling that in the second Beis Hamikdash there would not have been an Aron. How would the Beis Hamikdash be considered complete, be even functional or valid without the Aron? We recognize that what was hidden before the destruction of the first Beis Hamikdash were the most valuable, the most precious items to Klal Yisrael. You could say what was dearest and most treasured in the possession of the Jewish people was all stored away. Together with the Aron, Shlomo Melech made a place which, together with the Aron, could be stored away the most irreplaceable, priceless assets of the Jewish people. And so we have there, as mentioned, the Aron itself, which again was built in the times of Moshe Rabbeinu. Both sets of the Luchos Habris, the original Torah scroll, the staff of Aaron, that special sample of the man, which was saved for posterity, irreplaceable, priceless items. But all these were gone in the second Beis Hamikdash. All right, that's not, that's of course unfortunate. But when the Aron is not in place, how can the Beis Hamikdash even be considered valid? The Rebbe offers a fascinating explanation at the core of which is the premise that when Shlomo Melech built the first Beis Hamikdash, as we know in Halacha, every part of the Beis Hamikdash has a different level of holiness, of sanctity. As a matter of fact, the Mishnah says that there are 10 levels of sanctity. 10 levels, in other words, of sanctity based on location, beginning with Eretz Yisrael, which is in general more holy than all the other lands of the world. Yerushalayim, or it's actually not the next, but further on, the third would be Yerushalayim, which is more holy than every other city. And then you have, of course, Har HaBayis, the Temple Mount. From there, proceed to the area just outside of the Beis Hamikdash, the peripheral zone surrounding the Beis Hamikdash. And then within the Beis Hamikdash itself, there are various areas, one higher than the other, both in actual topography, in other words, literally built on a higher plane on the mountain, and also higher in holiness, a higher level of holiness. And just as all of Eretz Yisrael, its holiness is determined by specific halachic standards or credentials, and it must be when it is, and so too Yerushalayim and the Beis Hamikdash, there are also credentials by which the holiness is established, meaning that if necessary, the Jewish people can extend the parameters and the boundaries of the city of Yerushalayim to have that holiness extended to a larger area. There's a procedure for this. There are conditions, there are credentials in order to go about this. But it can be done. the same is true for the same, actually, Har HaBayis, in fact, will be extended when Mashiach comes. This is a fascinating bit of information. The amounts by which Har HaBayis will be enlarged in comparison to what it was. In comparison to what it was in the times of this second Beis Hamikdash, is far greater than perhaps imagined. Har HaBayis, the area of Temple Mount, will actually become 36 times larger than it was. 36 times as big. In any event, it can be enlarged. And just as there are certain requirements in order to just as there are requirements in order to bring, or in order to determine a certain part of a certain area, a certain part of land, to be part of Yerushalayim and bequeathed with sanctity of Yerushalayim. The same is true of the Beis Hamikdash. When it was built, Shlomo HaMelech had to intend to bequeath the holiness, the sanctity of this level of sanctity of the Beis Hamikdash to that area where the Beis Hamikdash was built. And each area had to be intended for that specific level of holiness. So there was a distinct intention with when setting aside the area and building the edifice upon the Kodesh HaKadoshim, the innermost chamber. There was a specific intention that this area should have a greater sanctity than the rest of, and the preceding area, which also has a greater sanctity than the preceding area, and so on. So based on this premise, the Rebbe maintains that when Shlomo HaMelech built the Beis Hamikdash originally and set aside the place for the Kodesh HaKadoshim, we know that the Beis Hamikdash, its holiness, is not just in the actual rooms, the chambers of the Beis Hamikdash, but the holiness penetrates the very ground where the Beis Hamikdash is. And to what depth? All the way down to the core of the earth. The area of the Beis Hamikdash and all of the earth below it, all the way down to the core of the planet, is considered, in other words, contains that degree of sanctity that is associated with each part of the Beis Hamikdash. So Shlomo HaMelech intended that the sanctity of the Kodesh HaKadoshim also should be granted to the entire area beneath the Kodesh HaKadoshim, all the way down. So this is why when he built the Beis Hamikdash, he intentionally built another chamber below the Kodesh HaKadoshim, far below, and built this labyrinth of tunnels and secret doors, trap doors, winding tunnels and stairways to get down to this secret chamber below the Kodesh HaKadosh. Why is it important that he built this at the time of the Beis HaMikdash? At the time of building the Beis HaMikdash. Why is it important that Shlomo Melech built it? Well, the first thing that comes to mind, figure, if Shlomo Melech built something, Shlomo Melech, HaChocham Mikol Adam, the wisest man to have ever lived, if he built a system to evade conquerors, so that when they come to Chas v'Shalom destroy the Beis HaMikdash, which he knew would eventually happen, as mentioned before, he certainly, as the wisest man to ever live, certainly you could be sure that if he tried to hide something, no one's going to find it. If he intended that something should remain hidden, it will remain hidden. And you can look and search and dig all you want. You're just not going to find it. And of course, there have been many who have dug and searched and looked all around. But you can be sure that Shlomo Melech, we can rely on Shlomo Melech to be inventive enough to construct and put together a system which just wouldn't be plumbed. And all the researchers and with all the digging, all the archaeologists wouldn't get to the bottom of it, and perhaps not even to the beginning of it, or to the beginning of it, and be able to detect that there is a continuation where it leads to. So that's the first thing that comes to mind. Shlomo Melech, the wisest of all men, makes this system, and in doing so, he ascertains that there will be a place to store away, to hide away the Aron when that time comes, and no one will ever find it until we can securely place it back in the Kodesh HaKadoshim. But the Rebbe sees here another element. When Shlomo Melech built the Kodesh HaKadoshim, as we mentioned, he granted that sanctity to the entire depth of the earth below it. So when he built this chamber below the Kodesh HaKadoshim, deep down, in fact, he was building an alternative Kodesh HaKadoshim. There's another chamber with the same sanctity, the same halachic status of Kodesh HaKadoshim. It's just that there's one above ground and one below ground. So there's a time when the Aron will be kept in its place above ground in the revealed Kodesh HaKadoshim, the Holy of Holies, and there's a time when it will be necessary to keep the Aron in the concealed Kodesh HaKadoshim, in the underground Holy of Holies. But both of them are considered Kodesh HaKadoshim. Both of them have the halachic status of Kodesh HaKadoshim. So in no way was the Aron absent from the Beis HaMikdash during the second Beis HaMikdash. During that period, the Aron was there. And as a matter of fact, it was in the Kodesh HaKadoshim. But there are two Kodesh HaKadoshims. One above ground, one below ground. So this was it was in the underground the whole time. It was inaccessible. When the Kohen Gadol would go in to sprinkle the blood on Yom Kippur, he couldn't by any means sprinkle the blood between the poles of the Aron, but he did. But the Aron was in the Kodesh HaKadoshim, and he did do what was necessary in the place of the Aron. of the revealed Kodesh HaKodashim, while the Aron was situated in the hidden, below ground Kodesh HaKodashim. So once this is understood, that Shlomo Melech actually built the Beis HaMikdash with two chambers considered Kodesh HaKodashim, and both of them are totally equal in status as far as the sanctity and the halachic status of Kodesh HaKodashim. It's just one was a time for, one was to be used in a time when the Aron was secure above ground, and one was to be used in a time when the Aron would otherwise not be secure above ground. And so it's stored in the underground, Kodesh HaKodashim. Now we can understand why the Rambam is including this historical background. This is not a story, it's not a historical description or background information. The Rambam is telling us here a halacha, that there is a part of the Kodesh HaKodashim which is below ground and that has the halachic status of Kodesh HaKodashim. So even when the second Beis HaMikdash was built and the Aron was apparently not in its place, in fact, it was in its place. It has two places. There are two places, and they can be used alternately. And so the Aron in the time of the second Beis HaMikdash was actually in the Kodesh HaKodashim. It was in the part which Shlomo Melech built with that same intention of granting it the degree of sanctity of Kodesh HaKodashim, and was therefore the Rambam also emphasizes that it was built by Shlomo Melech, who's the one who granted the Beis HaMikdash, and as a matter of fact, all of Har Bayis with its subsequent degree of holiness, and B, the Rambam emphasizes that it was built with this labyrinth of tunnels and was built deep down. The Rambam is here stressing, accentuating that this is precisely below the area of the Kodesh HaKodashim. And that's why it had to be winding tunnels to evade the searches or to circumvent the possibility of others, the conquerors and so on, of perhaps being able to follow this tunnel system. So it had to be windy, but it also had to be windy in order to reach the ultimate destination, which would be precisely below the Kodesh HaKodashim above ground. Once we recognize that there are two parts of the Kodesh HaKodashim, we come to a fascinating discovery. It turns out then that there's a certain part of the Beis HaMikdash, which is still intact, which was never destroyed. Not only was it never destroyed, it was never touched. There's an untouchable part of the Beis HaMikdash which is eternal. It's eternal, and both in the first Beis HaMikdash, in the destruction of the first Beis HaMikdash, the destruction of the second Beis HaMikdash, it has never been touched, ruined, sullied, nothing. It is entirely intact and in perfect condition. Just amazing. We always think of the Beis HaMikdash as completely destroyed. All we have, unfortunately, is the western wall, which remains, and the western wall is, in fact, ultimately not part of the Beis Hamikdash per se. It's the retaining wall for Har HaBayis. So it's a wall which surrounded Temple Mount. Dozens of yards away from the Beis Hamikdash itself. It's not part of the Beis Hamikdash. The Beis Hamikdash seems to have been entirely destroyed. But in fact, there's a part of it which is perfectly intact. And what's that part? The most quintessential part of the Beis Hamikdash. The very core of the Beis Hamikdash, if you will. The Kodesh HaKadoshim, the innermost chamber, and which of the two innermost chambers? The concealed one, the innermost chamber, the underground, inaccessible innermost chamber of the Kodesh HaKadoshim. That part of the Beis Hamikdash, so we say the core that is so deep and so hidden that it can't be touched, that is the part of the Beis Hamikdash which still remains. Let's take a look at, before we go to another issue relating to resurrection of the dead, relating to, or revival of the deceased, Techiyas HaMesim. Before we discuss an interesting aspect of Techiyas HaMesim and then come back to the lost ark, which in fact turns out to be not at all lost, of course. It's waiting in its place, and it's actually in that part of the Beis Hamikdash which still stands. Before we move on, again to something relating to Techiyas HaMesim, any questions from our listeners?
Yeah. Can you please tell us if it was two different artifacts that one was hidden in a secret room and the second was present in the second temple? Did I understand you right? Or because you said that highest priest has a possibility to use it in some of the services in the second temple, or I misunderstood something. I understand that. First of all, was it double the parts that were hidden in the ark, or it was just only one of the jar of manna and one menorah and one scroll? That's how could they have a possibility to use it in the second temple if it was secretly hidden underground?
Good. So thanks for bringing that up. So to clarify, these were all items, as somewhat mentioned earlier, these are all items which there is no second and there can be no seconds. These are irreplaceable, extremely unique in the extreme. Imagine the first Sefer Torah which Moshe Rabbeinu wrote himself. So there can't be a second first Sefer Torah which Moshe Rabbeinu wrote. The luchos, the 10 commandments on the tablets. The tablets of stone in which Hashem inscribed the Aseres HaDibros. The shattered ones of course only happened once. The complete ones, again, this is the second set which Hashem gave us. So there is no second, there is no alternate.
Yeah, I understand that. But what about menorah? And from my understanding, the man could be divided and put in a different jar and could be presented in a different place. This is number one question. Number two question, where was it hidden in time of the destruction of the first temple? And the third part is, how was it transferred from David to his son, Shlomo, to begin with? Just kind of a little bit the process, if you can.
Right, so these items, yes, all of these items, the 5 items mentioned in Talmud and Yuma, together with the ark itself and the tablets, all those items were kept in the Kodesh HaKadoshim prior to the building of the Beis HaMikdash by Shlomo HaMelech. They were kept in the Kodesh HaKadoshim of the Mishkan, of the originally mobile tabernacle, the Mishkan, which eventually was built in a set place in Shiloh, in the city of Shiloh, and it was always kept in that innermost chamber of the Mishkan, in the Kodesh HaKadoshim in Shiloh. Of course, once the Beis HaMikdash was built, everything was transferred to Yerushalayim, and since then it has remained in Yerushalayim again. So those items which were in the Kodesh HaKadoshim of the first Beis HaMikdash before its destruction, as mentioned in the times of King Yeshayahu, they were transferred to that secret storage room, or actually a secret Kodesh HaKadoshim below ground. And at the time of the first Beis HaMikdash, they were already hidden. So when the first Beis HaMikdash was destroyed, those items were not destroyed. Those items were not discovered to begin with. And as a result, because they were hidden in the time of the first Beis HaMikdash, at the time of the destruction of the first Beis HaMikdash, so when the second Beis HaMikdash was built, they still remained underground. And of course, when the second Beis HaMikdash was destroyed, they remained to be hidden underground. So ever since then, since the times of King Yoshiao, still in the time of the first Beis HaMikdash, they are hidden in that alternate underground, hidden Kodesh HaKadoshim.
Is it known the place where the second temple was built? Because if it's not such a humongous area, then at least we would have some idea where the secret labyrinths and caves are actually built. Because
so we know that the second Beis HaMikdash was built on the same site as the first, and the Hashem tells us clearly that once He chose Yerushalayim as the site of the Beis HaMikdash, that is the only place that a Beis HaMikdash can be built, and that is, and the place, as a matter of fact, of the Mizbeach, of the outer altar, is in particular extremely precise. It had to be built on the exact location that was determined for the Mizbeach, to the, again, with extreme precision, to the extent that when the second Beis HaMikdash was built, it was necessary for, even though there were people that were still around from the times of the first Beis HaMikdash who were old enough to remember the first Beis HaMikdash, and who actually had performed, there were Kohanim, who were Kohanim, who still had performed and remembered performing the services in the first Beis HaMikdash. Still, it was necessary for a prophet to determine by prophecy the exact location of that of the altar, so that it should be built in its exact spot. To such an extent is the precision of the place of the Mizbeach, the altar, and understandably then, of course, the innermost chamber, the Kodesh HaKadoshim, was also in the exact same place as in the first temple when the second was built. Again, we mentioned that the place of the ark the place for the Aron in the Kodesh HaKadoshim is on that stone in the center of the chamber. That stone, which is the Even HaShasiyah, the stone of foundation around which the world was formed. So certainly that's a unique location, which was not just incidental in the Holy of Holies, in the Kodesh HaKadoshim. So once that place is determined, the Beis HaMikdash had to be built there, and the second Beis HaMikdash was built there, meaning that the Kodesh HaKadoshim of the second Beis HaMikdash was also precisely above the location of that underground Kodesh HaKadoshim.
And nobody still can ever find any evidence of it.
Again,
It's kind of really interesting.
Leave it to Shlomo HaMelech to figure out how to evade all of the researchers and archaeologists.
Yeah,
so we know exactly where it is in terms of here's the catch. We know exactly where it is, or truth is there are three opinions among archaeologists as well as rabbis, although there is one, so to say, mainstream, one most accepted opinion, but there are three opinions as to the exact location of the Beis HaMikdash on the Temple Mount, where exactly on Har HaBayis was the Beis HaMikdash situated in terms of geography on today's maps. But assuming that we know where the Beis HaMikdash was, which again is not definite because there are three opinions, but still each opinion, according to that opinion, would know where the Kodesh HaKadoshim is. So we could determine then, more or less, the
location.
Just a minute. We could determine the latitude and longitude of the whereabouts of the Aron, of that secret Kodesh HaKadoshim, the underground one. However, we don't know its altitude. We don't know the depth.
Oh, yes.
So we know the latitude and longitude, we could more or less, or at least know the three possibilities, or the supposed location of where it must be, pretty much pinpoint where it must be, but we have no idea how far down.
Sure. Are all three places at this point a territory that belongs to Israel or not?
All three places are on the Kodesh HaKadoshim would be, according to all three opinions, on the area which is known today as Temple Mount, Har HaBayis, and all within the walls, within the walls that are known to be the boundaries of Har HaBayis.
Okay.
Thank
you so much for answering my question. It's
Sure.
really interesting. It's really a very, very intriguing and very unusual facts. Thank you.
So as a matter of fact, once bringing up like where, what was lost and what was not by the destruction of the first and second temples, it's important to note that Chazal tell us that Maise Yidei Moshe Nitzku, everything that was made by Moshe Rabbeinu, everything that Moshe Rabbeinu, or in other words, everything that Moshe Rabbeinu oversaw its manufacturing, or anything that Moshe Rabbeinu put together, that Moshe Rabbeinu arranged, any such artifacts, any such arrangements are eternal, indestructible. They cannot, we are assured that they will remain for posterity. As a matter of fact, the Mishkan itself, the actual the beams, the sockets, the curtains of the tabernacle in the desert also still exist. They were also hidden away because these were made by Moshe Rabbeinu. And everything that Moshe Rabbeinu makes certainly remains intact and will never be lost or destroyed. With that in mind, we then understand that although we do not know for sure where the other artifacts of the Beis Hamikdash are, the other vessels we mentioned, the menorah, the shulchan, the table for the showbread, the mizbeach, particularly the inner altar, the golden altar, we do not know for sure the whereabouts of these. And there are those that assume or suspect that they were taken to the Vatican. Of course, there's famous, there's plenty been written about the menorah itself, whether it has been brought to the Vatican, and whether and the assumption that because perhaps it was brought to the Vatican, that the Arch of Titus, which depicts a circular or half-circular branch menorah, would then be accurate. In fact, that's not there's very little. It's not an accurate argument for reasons we won't discuss now. But the menorah still may be, perhaps, in the Vatican. It may also not be. We don't know. But what we do know is that the menorah that was in the Beis Hamikdash does exist. The Mizbeach Hazav, the golden altar, as well as the shulchan, the table for the showbread, they all do exist. None of them could have been destroyed. We can say for sure that they were not captured, but they for sure were not destroyed because they are eternal and they will be present in the third Beis Hamikdash to be built speedily in our day. May it be immediately now. Amen.
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 Thank you, Rebbe. Have a great Shabbos.
Very welcome. Good
Thank
Shabbos.
you.
Any further questions? The class has been concluded, but any further questions, I'd be glad to address them.
Okay, thank you so much, Rabbi Lifshitz. It was a great pleasure and inspirational. May we merit to see the Beis Hamikdash speedily. And if anyone does want to come and search where it is, if Chas v'Shalom Beis Hamikdash, if Mashiach doesn't come very soon, you're more than welcome to join the senior citizen trip to Israel, and we will definitely search out the hidden tunnels, try to get the Ark. So, just something to look forward to.
Except that because we determined that the ground, the entire earth below the Kodesh HaKadoshim has the same halachic status, the same degree of sanctity. So actually, none of us will be allowed to go there because
we could use a long.
No one is allowed to go there,
Uh-huh.
right? Even the Kohen Gadol could only go there on Yom Kippur. So certainly we would be allowed entry even deep underground.
Well, but we might be able to use computer methods and X-ray machines type of thing to figure out.
Yeah, but you can't be directly above. You got to go from an
On
angle.
the side, what's the difference? X-ray is X-ray.
Ask the oil diggers what the difference is. They're the experts of this.
Right. Anyway, Yasha
I still maintain the ultimate expert in this is Shlomo HaMelech, and no one's going to figure it out.
Bring him back.
Right, so-
That's it. When Mashiach is going to come, we'll have Tchias HaMesim, and he'll help us get it. Take care, everyone. Sei gesund.
Thank you.
Amen.
Okay.
Thank you.
Good night,
Shabbos
Rabbi.
to everyone.
Thank you. Bye all.
Thank you so much.
You're
Bye-bye.
welcome.